Good evening, everybody. A very warm welcome at the Pakhuizen Zwijger for a new edition of VPRO Tegenlicht Meet Up, which translates as a backlight meetup in English. Edition number 147, talking about India in time of anger, following the documentary that was broadcasted last Sunday evening on Dutch national television, and that is still available online. As you've noticed, program tonight will be in English. I hope that it's not an unpleasant surprise for people here in the audience. Otherwise, I'm sure we'll find a way to make sure everybody can understand each other. But that makes discussion and dialogue with for people with an English background, of English-speaking background, easier. That's the idea. Well, the main question of today, in which you follow the broadcast, of course, is what's the impact of globalization in India, and what is the tendency of sort of counter reaction to that globalization in India? And we have that discussion or dialogue with a list of experts that we've invited, and with you, the audience. And we will have that discussion after we show a few short clips of the documentary. That's the idea. Before I introduce the lineup of people that we have tonight, I would like to make sure that you know the website of Tegenlicht is in existence, and it features an article named "The Toll of Globalization," with reflections on the documentary from two outspoken voices in the Dutch and Belgian context, Maarten Boudry and Sarah Noorhusen. And it's also interesting to note that there's a growing number of towns and cities in the Netherlands that host their own Tegenlicht Meet Up. This week, local meetups have taken place or will take place in Utrecht, Lochem, Haarlem, Hoorn and Deventer. I say that because if you feel like hosting your own Tegenlicht meetup, please contact VPRO for additional support and some tips and tricks on how to do it, because it's really nice, and you make your own. You can organize your own evening and really choose the angle you wish to do it in. So that is interesting to find out. Well, let's take a look at the lineup for tonight. We start traditionally with the director of the broadcast, Shu Chen Tan is with us. We have a discussion about the making of the documentary, about what she has learned in making that documentary, insights she has gained. So that's the start. After that, we will have a discussion with Sharbani Bhattacharya. She's board member of the Finnish Society. Has nothing to do with Finland, but that's an NGO focusing on financial inclusion in India. And she was, until recently, partner at KPMG. And we will be talking about, well, the main question of tonight. What's the impact of globalization in India, both economically and politically? After that, we have a panel discussion featuring Yuri Bohm. He was a correspondent in India for 5.5 years for NRC newspaper and NOS broadcasting organization. He now writes for the Groene Amsterdammer, of course, also about India, but not exclusively, I understand. Wart Berenschot is with us as well. He's a postdoc researcher at the Netherlands Institute of Southeast Asian and Caribbean Studies. That's a mouthful. Focusing on India and in Indonesia. Topics are local democracy, clientelism and identity politics. So good to have you with us. And Rohit Jamb is with us. He has a career in strategic management and insights. Has been living in the Netherlands for 9 years now, but has an Indian background, so good to have you here with us as well. We'll be talking with the three gentlemen about Hindu nationalism and violence against Muslims. That's it for tonight. We aim to end the dialogue at around 9:40, 9:45. And there's plenty of room for you to participate in the debate. I was just wondering who has an Indian cultural background, who's with us tonight? Okay, well, good to have you with us. Specific reason you came, you want to...
I'm from India, and I'm very interested in these kind of topics.
What do you think of the documentary?
I haven't seen it. I'm planning to see it. Sorry for that.
No problem at all, no problem at all. Who feels we should be worried about the current state of affairs in India? Mister.
Well, it's a long story, but globalization has impacted directly on the country. And I've been dealing with urban poverty and slum politics and all. And you find that the urban poor are sort of, marginalized. And worse, the elections, the elections are not free and fair. So, democracy is rather almost hijacked by the politicians who are not rather very well performing. That's it. In India, I think lots of people in India may find politicians are not all very clean or very, reliable. Put it very mildly.
And you visit India often?
Every year, yeah, I'm there quite frequently. I just wrote a book about Mumbai, which is about urban poverty and local politics, and then, what's the last one? Urban governance, right? Local governance.
Just for a short advertisement, what's the name of the book?
Urban poverty, local governance, and everyday politics in Mumbai.
Thanks a lot. Anyone? 2017. Okay. Anyone else wishes to reflect on the current state of affairs in India? Something we should be worried about, or maybe not at all? I have some other questions for you, so don't be... well, who can relate to the pressure that we see in a documentary about millennials finding it very hard to find a job? Is it something, yes, or some reflections from you? Maybe?
So, I'm Dutch Indian. I was born and raised here. So, the struggles for millennials is across the board. It's a global impact. Nowadays, you can have a career in social media management without actually having any experience or even an education behind that. Whereas when you were growing up, you needed an education to get ahead. So we've got from what we were taught 20 years ago in school, it doesn't even seem relevant more in the real world, irrespective if you're in Holland or in India or you even go to Japan or you go to the States. So, I mean, I think that pressure is definitely there for millennials to perform continuously as well.
And that's really something typical to Indian society?
I don't think it's only typical to Indian society. I think it's typical to society in general.
Thanks. Even kijken. Who thinks we can see similar tensions in Europe as well? Because, well, actually last week we talked about more illiberal tendencies in the European context. Countries like Hungary, for instance, Poland came by. Does anyone see clear similarities between the two continents? Maybe this is a bit too far-fetched. Let's just continue. Yeah, sorry. Yuri, yeah, hi.
There's something about it. A friend of mine, Casper Thomas, he wrote a book about the illiberal tendencies in politics all over the world. And Mr. Modi, the current Prime Minister of India, was also in the book. He wrote about him as well. And he says, Casper Thomas says that there are many connections to his illiberal style of governing compared to European illiberal styles. And it's, of course, like... the putting together in confrontation of several communities, and that's what we will be talking about tonight as well. I think it's in India it's about the Hindu-Muslim community, maybe the Dalits against the upper castes. It seems that Mr. Modi is not really doing a lot to put those conflicts down, and this is comparable to some illiberal styles like in Hungary, in Europe. Yeah.
Political, something to be gained.
Yeah. It's politics in India. We will be discussing that. I think is quite cynical.
Let's leave it at that for the moment. Suchen, can I invite you on stage, please? Suchen Tan, ladies and gentlemen. Hi, Suchen. Good to have you with us.
Yes. Hi. Good evening.
The obvious first question always is, how did this topic came by? Did you choose it? Or was it something that was resonating with your colleagues already?
Well, I think the reason why we went to India is that we made another Tegenlicht episode about 2 years ago with the same writer, Pankaj Mishra, and that was an episode in the UK, where he lives in London. And he had been writing this book, The Age of Anger. Maybe some of you have read the book or know about it. He is looking for the cause of the anger that is rising across the globe, not just in India, but everywhere. And so we talked about it. He is doing a lot of thinking about where is it coming from, what are the motives, what is the undercurrent. He's really very thinking about the backgrounds of all this. And we had been filming with him in London, and he has been talking about the Brexit and about what was happening in the UK at that moment. That was 2 years ago. And then he said, if you really want to understand where this book originated from, then you have to come with me to India.
Okay.
And I was quite surprised, because I was like, well, how can you tell me about it? And he said, there is this very tiny village in the Himalayas where he's been visiting this village for years, since he was a student even. And he said, after my studies, I ended up in this tiny village in the Himalayas, and that's where I started reading and thinking and looking at the world from that perspective. And then he said, that's really where the book started, The Age of Anger.
It's
That's
a small village in an upcoming
long time ago.
economy.
Says that's where my ideas and my thoughts started to write this book. And then, of course, we were curious to see this place and to learn more about it. And then he said, actually, you can see the whole problem that we can see all across the world. Now you can see it in this tiny village.
Yeah.
With the people of this tiny village, you can already understand what is going on if you just look at their lives, what has been going on in their lives.
And did you see it when you visited the
So
village?
so that's why we said,
No.
okay, if you want to take us, we will come with you. That's what we did, and he took us to this village, which you see it in the film. It's called Mashobra. It was like a kind of a paradise there when you arrive, because it's so beautiful. It's in the middle of the mountains, and in a way, it's really, if you arrive there, coming from the Netherlands, you're really like, this is paradise. But when you really take a closer look at the people in the village, then you understand that these people are facing the same problems that people are, the young people facing in Delhi, and but maybe also young people facing here in the Netherlands, maybe the same the problems that people are facing in the UK. So there is a connection between what people, how they experience it, and that's
is globalization.
It's the effects of globalization, and he was trying to explore. After 20 years of globalization in India, for liberating the economy in India, he says there has been lots of things have happened, but maybe this is also the right time to look back at the other effects of globalization, not just the positive stories about economic growth and
GDP,
everything you have,
indicators,
because there are a lot of rich people in India, of course, as well. If you go to the big cities, you see it, but he says there's also another story to tell about the effects of globalization. I think that's what he wanted to show to us.
Okay.
The effects, and you can see it in the tiny village.
You did see it.
Yes, but you can also see it in the big city, of course, because this is kind of a general story about the effects of globalization.
I've understood you. Another idea for this film was also to show the excessive wealth in India. Is that true or not really? Because I didn't see it in the film.
So much. No, that was not really the purpose of this film. I mean, it was really to show the lives of the people are not so wealthy, are just they have been hearing all those promises all those years about fantastic economic growth and everything, but in reality in their lives there hasn't been that much change. And at the same time they hear all these dreams about getting rich and how India is becoming a really modern country where everybody can develop their talents and everything, but in reality a lot of people have the feeling that they cannot make it, that they cannot, it's not for them, it's for the others but not for them, and that I think that makes them that is the undercurrent of the anger that you also
is it because I've read some people saying that although that's true, absolutely they have maybe gone up a bit, other people have gone up far more, and that's where sort of the growing inequality has come from. But if you look at it from a different perspective, you can still see that economically they have progressed, albeit less. Of course,
a lot of people have becoming really very wealthy and a lot of economic growth, but the inequality has also been growing, and that is a problem that is not only in India. I think it's in other countries as well. As the country went through this economic development, the inequality also grew. So there is the gap is widening between the people on the top and the people at the bottom, and that's causing lots of problems.
Okay. Talk about that later in more detail. Wondering what reactions have you received on the film? Specific voices you
that's a
want to
different
highlight?
question. I would like to hear reactions from the people here who've come here to this evening. I'm very curious to hear more about. I mean, it's wonderful that we have some people from India here who can tell us about their experience, because we are just journalists, and I've been in India for a week or so, or 2 weeks.
Was it your first time in India?
No, I'd been there before, but I mean, I'm curious to hear your stories about your experience, of course.
I think we'll go
Yeah.
we'll go on that topic when you're on stage, if you're okay with that, Sarwani. What were the obstacles filming this film? Were there specific topics you wanted to highlight and were difficult to get before the camera, or I understand there was maybe something with the visa that was difficult?
Well, in general, we had the feeling that the freedom of the press is for us, coming from the Netherlands as journalists working in the Netherlands, we are used to a complete freedom that we can do everything we want here in the Netherlands, and we had to be a bit more careful going to India. I think for Pankaj himself, it was maybe also he can. Yeah, I think he's because he's living in London and most of the year, and then he also visits India, but he can always leave if he wants. I think for him, I think he is very brave in what he is expressing about what he's seeing in his own country, where he is worried about his concerns. He is sharing it, and I think it wouldn't be that easy to talk about it that openly if he would have lived in India. So yeah, it's a matter of what can you tell about a country, and where are the red lines where maybe people who are in the embassy, or they are not so happy, of course, with journalists who are telling a story that is maybe not their story.
Okay. Do you have a specific fascination for India yourself?
Yeah, it's a fascinating country. It's an enormous country with an enormous history and enormous culture. It's a beautiful country. I really love it to go there and travel. And it's a very complicated country as well.
Complicated in how it's working, or complicated to
all
understand?
All the different groups of people, all the different, all the differences. So that's why it's so fascinating also, I think.
What was your encounter with the Vet Nagar like, the gentleman from the Indian Cow Protection Organization?
Well, this is something that I'd never heard of. For me, it was completely new. This is a phenomenon that I'd never experienced, and it was also fascinating to hear about them.
For people who haven't seen the film, what does he do?
These are young men, mostly men, and they are coming from villages, or maybe they live in the city, but Vet Nagar lived in the outskirts of Delhi. And he reinvented himself as a Hindu nationalist. I think he might have gone to the university, wanted to become a lawyer, wanted to have a normal job, didn't succeed, and then he started to find another role for himself in the protection of cows. And coming from the Netherlands, you don't really understand what he means by protection of cows. But of course, this is a religion kind of organization, Hindu nationalists, and they are dedicated. They dedicate themselves to protect cows, but that also means to attack people who are
because a cow is a holy animal.
Who are transporting cows, who are because of course for the Hindu people the cow is a holy animal, so you're not supposed to eat the cow meat. But there are other groups in India, they do eat this meat, and so there is kind of a clash between those men.
What was he like?
attack.
Was he really that radical as you might think seeing the film?
I think he's quite radical, and of course because we are coming from a foreign film crew coming in, he was quite flattered to be filmed, and he really wanted to be filmed, and I mean he filmed us as well, and he put all the images on his website to show to his constituency that he is so famous that there's even a Dutch crew coming from the Netherlands to film him.
All the way from
so
Holland
that
to
was
film him,
good PR for him, I think. But it's also kind of scary because they're quite fanatic, and there's a lot of violence involved, and that's really scary.
We'll talk about that later in the panel discussion. Anyone has a question maybe for Shuchen? Okay, not yet. Do you see Because you know in Europe quite well, of course. First, ask the similarities between sort of dynamics in Europe, in politicians playing the nationalist card more than they used to, and what's happening in India. Do you see strong tendencies? You reflected on it.
Well, I
just a
think
minute
that's
ago.
the most interesting question to understand, because this is not something that's only going on in India. It's going on in Europe. It's going on in the West as well. It's the feeling that people have that they cannot benefit from all the growth and the wealth that's going on. They feel left behind. You look at France with the people wearing the yellow vests. Even maybe in the Netherlands also. I mean, there is a large group of people who have the feeling that nobody has listened to them. They have been left out of the process. We have only looked at it from the side of the people who are gaining from the globalization, and they have the feeling that they are not the ones. And besides that, nobody, the economists that have been promoting all this liberalization of the economies, they have maybe had a kind of a blind eye for this group of people. And now after 20 years, they realize that there is a large group of people that don't benefit from it.
Yeah.
And that translates into politics, and that's why they vote in this way. And that's also, like Pankaj is describing in his book and also in the film, that gives a kind of a ground for politicians to step in and kind of exploit that kind of feelings.
Yeah. Do you feel more films coming up with Pankaj Misrai maybe?
I have no idea. I think for now we have done 2 episodes with him, and I mean, you should actually look at both of them, because it's like it's a 2-part of a series more or less. And for now, I have no idea. I'm very curious to know what his next book will be.
Okay.
And
then
I
you know
think
what your next film will
but
be.
he's a fascinating person. He's a fascinating thinker, and a lot of times when he's talking about things, and then after 1 month or 2 months, you're thinking back. I think, okay, I do recognize the things that he has been talking about. So he has a kind of a talent to find those very small, signals in society, and understand how to where they stand for,
Yeah,
and
relate
where
them
it's
to
heading
larger
to,
dynamics.
and where it's
Yeah.
leading to.
Okay.
I think that's one of his great talents. Yeah.
Yeah. How did you find the other journalist, Snigdha Poonam?
Well, she's a young journalist from Delhi, and she's very talented. I think I found her really, really very interesting. She's writing, and she's also writing for a newspaper. She's very bright, very intelligent, and I think, I would love to go back to do more with her, because she is really, she can really explain what the younger generation, how they feel, and what is going on in her, in that group of people, that she's like in her 20s, late 20s, I think. She really understands what's going on in that generation.
Okay. Well, she's in the first clip I'm about to show, so let's take a look at her. Thanks for joining me, Shuchen.
Thank you so much.
First clip is featuring Snigdha Poonam about the large ambitions Indian students have in society. Let's take a look, and after that we'll talk about the implications of globalization in India.
It's very common for me to just arrive in a village, talk to the first 20-year-old, and to hear that, the thing that he wants to do is to make like millions of rupees, or just the scale of it. It was always the biggest this or that, or the richest person in the world, the most successful something or the other. And I kept hearing that over years, and which made me feel that there was something going on in their heads that even I didn't fully understand. And so, yes, I think ambition and the scale of their ambition definitely defines them. They are more globalized in so many ways that their parents or grandparents weren't, from the brands that they buy, to the schools and colleges they attend, to the culture that they consume on their cell phones and through social media and everything. It's more and more global. So for a 20-year-old in Indore, it's very common to have the same standards for success and the same standards for a good lifestyle as 20-year-old in like Iowa or Ipswich. So those like distinctions are merging very fast. And yet when you go out, when you turn in the age where you must like leave and then make those dreams come true, you realize that very little has changed in the country in terms of really the space for opportunities. So, they're going to the same kind of schools that their parents went to. They are learning the same kind of like skills that their parents were exposed to. The salaries haven't risen, for example. The jobs are only getting like scarcer. So in some ways, like in terms of like the real scope for the future, they are worse off than their parents. But in terms of what they want, they are like generations ahead of the previous ones. So it's just that, it's that gap that really interested me.
I'd like to invite on stage Sarbani Bhattacharya. Hi Sarbani, welcome. Hi. A bit more about your expertise. I've introduced you as a former partner at KPMG and also board member of the Finnish Society. Let's focus on the first on the last one first. The Finnish Society. What does it do?
Okay, so Finnish stands for Financial Inclusion and Sanitation and Health. This is a Dutch NGO that was started by the Dutch government giving it some seed capital, but in 2009, and started making toilets in India. And I think next month we inaugurate our 1 millionth toilet. So we celebrated 900,000 last year in India alone, and are now active in 4 countries in Africa and in Bangladesh as well. So that's Finnish, and this is really my khud tool, so I do this on a voluntary basis.
Okay.
As a partner at KPMG, you have to do a couple of other things other than earn your daily bread, and this is what I used to do.
Okay.
I was nominated on the Dutch Trade and Investment Board by KPMG, which was a unit set up by the earlier Mark Rutte government to advise the Dutch government on foreign investment, and that was my link with KPMG.
Yeah. Does India have does the Netherlands have a strong focus on India as an investment country?
I think so. It has always been a very important country to invest in, but more important since the Indian investments in the Netherlands about 8-9 years ago were really large. So that's how I got involved. Just personally, I'm born and raised in Bombay, in the big city Bombay, so not from a small town, which I think makes a difference in my approach and my attitude to globalization. I came here by accident, so I had a good life in India, no intention of coming here, so it's good to put that in perspective as well. But I got involved in the India business of KPMG since the Tata Steel investment.
That is still coming to IJmuiden.
Coming into buying over IJmuiden, and then of course there was the Mittals and the Apollos and stuff like that. So the 3 or 4 years that I led that business, as part of my work at KPMG, it was one of the largest investors into the Netherlands was India, the other way around. And that sort of spurred the Dutch missions into India, and a lot of fueled a lot of entrepreneurship. So there were a lot of MKB units that started working in India since then.
Okay.
And of course the big ones have always been there and consider themselves Indian companies. I'm talking Unilever, Philips, Shell. So that's basically my background.
Now you end up being in the Netherlands.
So I ended up being in the Netherlands. Now it's almost a matter of choice because I've donated my children to your country.
Oh, thanks a lot.
Very little Indian or international about them. I'm not complaining. I like it. The politics frustrates me. But that's the other side of the story, right?
Okay. Well, maybe talk about that a bit later.
Okay.
First of all, I'd like to know what you think about the film.
Oh, awesome, amazing! Huh? So I think that was my initial reaction. I think it was a very sensitively made film, so it really gives a very interesting perspective on things, which was quite a surprise even for me. I go back every year, but I haven't lived in India 20 years, and I've been briefly associated in the last 3 or 4 years more with the marginalized and the rural part of India, which was a complete shock to start with, because of my toilet business, as I call it. I agree with a lot of things. I was very impressed with the gentleman, with Pankaj and his story. It was a bit different because I do agree. So I completely agree with his explanation on the current state of politics, on the words he uses, on demagogue, on insidious journey towards harm. I get that. I also see the whole thing he describes about urbanization and development and how aspirations of people. I agree with him over there. I also agree with the whole piece he talks about, where he talks about religion being the binding factor that basically makes the dumb-driven cattle vote. So in that sense,
More so than in earlier times.
That is probably where I would not agree as much, because I also grew up with in a very, very competitive environment. There were 100,000 applications for Unilever, and there were 23 who got in. And I was one of the 23 who got in, and there was also, I think, a bit of an accident in retrospect. But I worked very, very hard to get there. And it was very clear. The line was very clear that you were just blessed because you were not born on the other side of the road where there were slums. Having said that.
Yeah, but was there maybe a difference in feeling entitled to all the promises globalization has and what the youth has now, and it was different back then, or?
Okay, so back then, so I'm older than I look.
Sorry.
Back then, there was no globalization. So I used to travel, when I worked for Unilever, I used to travel to Europe, and I needed a visa for every country I went to. I was put in a room with dogs outside because I landed up in Italy without a visa. So, there was no globe. So I think it started, and it's important to put, I think the film misses that perspective, though it's of much the same time. I dare say Pankaj Mishra is probably the same generation as me. But in a big city, we were exposed to a lot more than he probably was,
of course,
given the starting point being, we were kind of we had a handicap. But I think it really started in the early 90s, 91, when we had Dr. Manmohan Singh as the finance minister. He went on to become prime minister, which was, I think, the best period, the 2004 to 2014 that he was prime minister. And I would not recommend you to read the book, The Accidental Prime Minister, but read it anyway. I'd like to just say that, I'd like to start first with this whole, I read a very interesting article by Lee Howell on the World Bank in the Economic Forum, which says, the belief in globalism may be dead, but globalization is alive and kicking. And the interesting thing about it is that he goes on to describe globalization as a top-down conspiracy to impose an international system that trumps national sovereignty. Just to let it sink, but I think national sovereignty is hard to trump. You can always hear its sort of faint lisping. And at this point in time, it's shouting out. It's shouting loud. And that, again, I completely agree with Pankaj, is because the politics has used it to play in its favor. And you see that the world over. So when the going gets tough, then you start getting more protectionist. So clearly that's true. But where I don't agree with him in terms of the impact of globalization, I think it has touched many, many, many more than it did 20 years ago. And I think that is the ripple effect that he misses. He misses that completely.
Can you elaborate a bit on that?
So the ripple effect is that I'm saying there was a very small class of people who was exposed to this and who dared to dream. Right? And they were actually...
In the 80s and 90s.
In the 90s even, 80s, but even in the 90s, which was actually, there was a whole discussion on whether the middle class, what was the middle class? It was 50 million at best. Today we're struggling with numbers between 500 million and even 700 million so-called middle class. So
who dare to dream about...
Who can afford to dream as well.
Exactly.
So if you compare like to like, you can never compare it percentage-wise because the numbers are bigger, but you have pretty much 1.5 of America sitting in India, right? So I think it has spread. The ripple effect is what I'm talking. So he talks about the tide is rising and it's brought up a couple of yachts. But there are lots of leaking boats, if I can quote him. But I think, one never thought the yachts would come up. There were no Ambanis, Birlas, Tatas. the privileged company to work for were the foreign investors. Yes,
Yeah.
so like the Philips or the Unilever. Today, the boy from the apple orchard, he talks about working for Tata's. That's cool. But he also talks about working for Facebook. A boy from an apple orchard in Himachal Pradesh would never even know about all of this when I grew up.
Yeah.
So I'm saying, therefore, it has touched the lives of many, many more. There are many, many more boats catching the tide and many more surfacing than the ones sinking.
Yeah.
And another book that I think is interesting to mention is The White Tiger, where specifically he talks, a gentleman, the writer talks about one from that vicious circle of poverty and how he got out. And I think it's a bad example because he had to actually kill somebody to get out of the circle. But I think there are many examples of people who've got out of the circle. And sure, they dare to dream much, much more than we ever dared to dream. Yeah. But I'm saying they can dare to dream because there has been so much more development. I mean, the gentleman was talking about poverty. Rural poverty alone has reduced from 78% to 24% in the last 20 years. Well, I have some numbers here in case I'm challenged on what I'm saying. And then you talk about inequality. That's the other very big one where he claims that it's been restricted to the few at the top. Yeah. But I'm saying those few at the top have pretty much had an impact on economic development. So Reliance has changed the lives of many. Yeah, it's made Mr. Ambani the richest man in the world, but it has changed the lives of many, many, many people. So we can't miss that out.
Yeah.
I mean, today we're talking about
But
20...
if it's a certain interrupt you, but if a lot of people have gained a better economic position, how does the dynamic work of politicians exploiting this for their conservative agenda or more?
Yeah. Okay, so politics and religion is a big one, but I'd just like to spend a minute on the social part.
Yeah.
So I think there's
a lot
been
has gained.
yeah, but I think there's a huge impact on social development which has to be linked to economic development. For example, the gay community. Yeah, the kind of protests that were being made and the kind of space that they've claimed for themselves was unimaginable. And it couldn't have happened if there was no economic backing. I mean, that was really a marginalized class. It still is in a lot of countries. Look at the women's independence. If you look at the Me Too movement in India today, it just tells you that even at the upper rung or the higher rung, women have found a new voice and a new independence, which can only come with economic independence. You see it in the debates on Muslim women rights. I have never seen debates run by Muslim women on changing old tenets of the religion that are oppressive in any other country.
Okay.
Yeah,
and that's really in public media, and that's really
in public
national
media.
debate.
In any media. I mean, you can Google it, you can see it anywhere. You know. So I'm saying all of that has to come with economic development because you then have the right to stand up for yourself.
Yeah.
When coming to what you said, I think the couple of things that have gone really wrong with India, and they kind of all of them are P's. The first one is really the population. When we had a prime minister's son who, short of wanting to castrate people, did it all, and we killed him. You know, we're Indian. You can't tell me how many kids I want to have. That was in the 70s. And from the 70s to 2000, we went up from 500 million to 1 billion people. We doubled in 20 years, right? A lot of it is a function of lack of education. And I'm really intrigued by the way you talk about how, they have classes for learning English. They somehow, so the second thing is the people. You know, Indian people have a passion and a purpose. Can't be held down. So we'll find a way. I mean, used to get onto this really crowded bus in school, and the conductor would say, little girl, push, say sorry, and get ahead. So everywhere, it's just grained in you that you need to get ahead. Despite
so really
the
competitive
politics.
environment has always been there.
And it's always despite the politics.
Getting back to your point on population, the first point you just mentioned, normally you see when economic growth is taking place that population growth declines a bit because people are better educated and see less need to have a lot of children. that must be visible in India as well, or
It is. So the growth rates are reducing from 2.8% to now I think 1.14% or something, but that's still
kids
a huge
per
base.
household? Or,
No percentage on 1 billion percentage
yeah.
growth. So that's still huge. There's still a huge marginalized community that is uneducated, and I think they're
Yeah.
linked. Yeah.
Yeah.
So if there's awareness. So forget contraception. Making a toilet in the home, there's no financial issue with it. It's just not right. It's a dirty thing. You don't want to have it in your house.
Okay.
So I'm saying changing behaviors, awareness, and education. Yeah, now you're talking about 15-20% of the population that's so far behind. Earlier you spoke about 50% of the population. But to somebody's point here, the big thing has really been why the earlier government failed was corruption and criminality. I mean, there was a huge period where, criminality was major. People killed for nothing, for money, and got ahead. And I think that's when, you really needed a change, and there was a lot of hope in Modi because he was self-made and all of that.
Has that changed?
No. I should have said at the beginning that if I make anybody uncomfortable with what I say, then that is the intention. But
Okay.
but no, I mean, right now it's like the politicians are behaving like epileptic meerkats, begging for votes. It's
Okay.
just, and to use religion, I think, is a slap on the cheek of time. Buddhism was formed because of the
What do you mean by that? A
problems.
slap in the cheek of time? What do you mean?
Well, in history says in India,
Mhm.
Buddhism came out as a religion because of the problems of the Hindu religion. That
Yeah.
was ritualism, that was casteism, that
Mhm.
was unnecessary expenditure, women oppression, right? And now to bring that back after, the British used it to their advantage, yeah? And after 100 years, to bring that back is, absolutely like slapping, history and
But
saying...
it does seem to work.
Well, I think it's temporary because I think, as I said, Indians are resilient.
Mhm.
Yeah, and it doesn't take long for the cracks to show up, right? At the end of the day, I can't see this wonderful hero of yours, the cowman.
Oh, in the film. Yeah.
In the film, I can't see him survive anywhere in the world for a long time. It's like Mr. Wilders.
So this is really something really temporary.
I don't think it's
Temporary.
temporary in like quicksand. Mr. Wilders is still doing well. He's thriving,
Mhm.
right? It's similar, but I think coupled with when you use religion, firstly to get votes and get power, but then when you use religion to increase marginalization, when you use it in place of economic development, they spent $50 million on a fair, the Kumbh Mela or something. You want to spend another 50 million on a temple, on the Ram temple issue, instead of social housing. That can't go far because the boy in the apple orchard or the teacher, the English teacher, they can see that this is not going to help me eventually. Indians have a huge respect for God. It's almost fear. But that also helps us do well. So we do good. It comes from within because then God will bless us. But and you see, God is not blessing me. I just spent so much money on this sacrifice.
Okay. So that will turn the tide.
At the end of the day, self is more important. If I
Okay.
have mouths to feed.
Yeah. Let's see if there's some first reflections from the audience. Yes.
I think you were looking at me sometimes. And
As you spoke about working with
yeah,
poverty.
you're from
so
Mumbai, you know
I'm
that
from
you're
Bombay,
a
yeah.
massive city,
Yeah.
and I just wrote a book about it. So
Correct.
I agree. I've been coming to India since the 70s. So India has progressed a lot, and there's less poverty all around. But let's focus today on globalization and the serious impacts of inequality. So I work in the slums. I was in the Chennai slums in October, and I spent a lot of time in the Mumbai slums. And I found vulnerable groups there who were really sort of, definitely marginalized. The Dalits, boys and girls, the Dalit boys don't have that many aspirations. If you're born as a Dalit, you have a harder time to come up. Then you have the elderly people who are having a hard time nowadays, and all the time the women and the girls. So there's a gender thing there, which is also seriously worrying me. And these people are all paying the price for globalization, and the state is not supporting them, while there are at the same time massive Indian schemes and policies, but they are not reaching the poor people. And there's a lot of corruption there, and politicians play a role in that corruption, and they use even the service delivery to channel benefits to poor people, and that's a very problematic situation. Apart from the fact, yeah, that's it.
So to rephrase it, so although you agree globalization has benefited a lot of groups, there's still groups left behind. The three you mentioned, women, ladies, the Dalit,
I'm
and the
not
elderly.
going. I believe all that you say, and I see it myself in close quarters. All I'm saying is that it's reducing. I think globalization has given it a lot of positive attention, and I'll give you specific examples of that. Slumdog Millionaire was this Oscar-winning film. Which was a product of globalization. What it left behind was, I think, some 200 and something, I don't remember the number, NGOs that focused on slum children. Now you may argue that only 50% of them actually do good, but I'm saying slum children have got a lot more attention in the last 10 years than ever before.
Do you feel they also really have real chances economically?
I think everybody has a chance. It's up to them to take it and a little bit of luck. I think the less we start depending on governments to do good, I mean, I would rather depend, I would go with Thomas Piketty and depend on corporates and individuals, high net worth individuals to do good. We see that working. We see Bill Gates Foundation working much better than the Modi Foundation, right? So, and I think that's also in the Indian culture to give back. Yeah, and I think that's a better horse to bet on. The other group is the flesh trade, the prostitutes. We have this Nobel Peace Prize winner, and after him and his global discourses, it's attracted a lot of aid money. That whole group and that whole business has been seriously impacted with global influence. So I'm just giving you a couple of examples saying things are changing. The slums in Bombay are not as bad as they used to be 30 years ago.
Do you feel there was enough attention for the social class sort of issue in India in the film? Because that was not really part of the analysis and part of the...
Yeah, I think the social class thing is it's done and dusted. There's just too much, a lot of people left India when we were at university simply because 40% of the seats were reserved for the lower classes. Corruption is a big problem there because, you never know where the seats eventually go. But now there's 50%, even 60%. I think economic backwardness is something that we need to deal with much better and much more than social classes. I think the divide between social classes is the worst in the last year or 2 years because it's the government's way to appeal to the majority. I mean, for me, democracy is only as good as it deals with its minorities. And the recent regime seems to be doing exactly the opposite. As I said, they're like, meerkats, just looking for the next vote. It cannot be sustainable, particularly because of globalization. I mean, I think Indians are far more aware of what the reality is than they were ever before. With internet, mobile, that's all globalization.
When you mention all these benefits of globalization, do you feel it has worked and it has paid out for India over the last few decades, or do you feel there's some other policies or some sort of corrections should be made to make it work for even more Indians?
I think every economy has its cyclical downs and ups. But to go back to the analogy of Pankaj Mishra, the rising tide can't be stopped. I mean, it started in 1991, as I said, with the opening, with the liberalization of the economy. You had to be global in India, a lot of our contemporaries who stayed back in India are as global as we are today. I mean, their kids study in the same colleges as us. Sure, this is a handicapped part of the a part of the population with a positive handicap we're talking about. But as I'm saying, the rest are following really quick. And it's the same with the world over. I mean, it has always been political for nations to be global when it suits them. Right? At the end of the day, you're always defending your own need. I mean, the whole call center industry has been a product of globalization. The whole BPO industry, where again
What's
the boy
BPO,
from
sorry?
the business process outsourcing.
Okay.
So a lot of the Western developed world countries do all of their back office work now in India.
Yeah.
A lot of them do research work in Bangalore, for instance. The apple orchard boy would have never had these opportunities if it wasn't for globalization.
So you're not afraid of large groups that maybe still not part of the economic growth will somehow will have grown resentments and really have their voice heard and maybe go against the system or anything like that?
Well, I think growing resentment is, again, the world over. It's not nice to be rich if you're not rich, right? So this class difference, I think, is something serious and that has to be curtailed. So it is absolutely a no-brainer that, there must be an inheritance tax, there must be higher wealth tax, there must be... But in all of these taxes, we need to remember that we're leaving it to the government to use those taxes prudently,
Yeah,
right?
where corruption comes in.
I'm saying it's better to have the challenge given to the individuals or to corporates to do it themselves than to keep depending on governments that come and go. But yeah, sure, inequalities need to be curbed. That would help resentment. But I think resentment in India or for an Indian is far more a sort of a throttle, a broma. Now my English is failing me. To get people going. I mean, it sort of fuels this passion to do better,
so
to
it won't
do more.
turn into anger really towards the situation. Because, well, the cliche about Indians that they're really acceptive to their life situation and they just go on. I'm not sure.
I find it hard to find Indians like that, but
okay.
Well, I have some Indian
sorry,
friends
Master,
I
but
planted to defend my case, just in case. But
okay.
no.
No,
I
but,
think
but
you're
you
right.
don't see that anger turning into a massive sort of
no,
outburst of.
Let me put it in proportion. I'm saying there'll always be a class of people who do the wrong things to vent anger. There will always be a class of people who feel denied, who are marginalized. As long as there is always a positive road and they have the choice that I think as responsible citizens or as governments we need to deal with. So I'm not saying it's utopia. It surely isn't. Life is much harder as an Indian than it is as a Dutch person. Yeah, and it will be simply because of the large numbers. Simply one of the main reasons being the large numbers. Having said that, I don't see the anger or the resentment being radical enough to turn the tide and make it a closed economy again.
Clear.
I would love to see anger being expressed over people being lynched or, women being raped.
Sort of the right type of anger,
Yeah.
Okay. Any more questions, maybe?
Well, I understand why there is nationalism, populism in the Western world, because many jobs are moving to China and to India, and there's the rising middle class. But still, it's 500 to 700 million people in the middle class, but they are voting nationalism and populism. So there is another reason why there is so massive also anger in the middle class. And I don't get that really from your answers. Is that because of religion, maybe? Because you're not talking about religion. Is that because of the Muslims versus the Hindus?
So
I'm not sure what is really the question.
Where does the anger in the middle class come from?
Yeah, why is there? Because if half of the population is in the middle class, why does the populist get a majority? So you miss the point, I think.
Okay. No. Well, if I understand your question, you're saying on one hand, I say 50% of the population is educated and smart and is the middle class, and on the other hand, then how can I explain why they vote for a populist government, right? I'm not sure the 500 million or whoever, the 33% who voted for this government, voted for a populist government. So I think if you look at the manifesto, 2 out of 50 points was about putting up a Ram temple. Yeah. I think the reason this government was voted in was because the earlier government, there was huge incumbency, there was like huge complacency, if I may use the word, and there was huge corruption. I think there was corruption, there was criminality, and there was also this whole piece about concessions, Everybody got a free bee. So there was just mismanagement, and people wanted a change. I don't think any of us voted for the change we see. Again, I have to be safe here, but I don't think Modi was voted because of his brand of Hindutva. And I don't think, so I think, so we will only know in the next couple of months if we make the same mistake again, but then I won't be sitting here to explain it, so that's okay.
No, I just want to add to Sherbani's point to the gentleman is that, no, it's correct. So what it is you're looking at two major political parties, the Congress and the BJP. Congress was in power for so long, so the population was like, Congress is not working for us, let's try the other route. Maybe that's going to work, and maybe we'll be happy from that. It's almost like voting Republican or Democrat. Let's see what's going to work.
Yeah, but the other thing about religion is that we pride ourselves as an Indian, we pride ourselves on the fact that we're a secular nation, which means we're not a theocratic nation. The government has no business to interfere in religion, cannot tell us what to do, what to eat, what to wear.
That's
for sure.
a broadly felt sentiment that won't change with Hindu parties being in charge.
No, and I think that's been true for 70 years or 65 years or 66 years. It's only the last 3 years that the government seems to be getting in there. The second thing is that I'm not sure if you're familiar with the party structure she mentioned, but now with this government, because of the huge majority, the lines between the party philosophy, the political party philosophy, and the to-do list of the government. There needs to be a bit of a difference between the political party and the philosophy behind that and what you're expected to do as a government. And I think those lines are getting very blurred at this point simply because of the large majority. So I think, I don't think the country voted for this brand of religion.
As a final question, what do you think for the elections of April, I think, in India?
I'm not an astrologer. I
understand.
Hope and pray.
Yes? What do you hope and pray for?
Well, I think one who sits on a pin must rise.
I love your expressions. I'm not sure if I understand them all, but they're really lovely. And then, what, do you think that a huge correction will come in the elections towards maybe Congress party or?
I don't know. I think that's just too much to hope for and expect because it's just too large a majority. I think there's lots to do with the number game. So I think it should be a free and fair election. And that was the point the gentleman made. That's another big question mark.
Yeah.
Of course, we do it better than the Americans. So we have to recount votes. Yeah. We carry those voting boxes on elephants, on bulls, on asses all over, right? You've seen the picture. So hopefully that'll go well. We also kill a couple of people before the elections, and that's historic.
That's sort of a tradition.
It's just anyone's guess. It's not something I would put my money on.
Okay.
But I have strong views about what I want should happen.
Yes, I've understood that. Thanks a lot. Sarbani Wadagaria, thanks a lot for your analysis. Cheers. Let's go and take a look at the second clip. Snigdha Poonam, the journalist we saw earlier, about cow radicalism, and cow radical Ved Nagar about why he does what he does. And then we have talk more about the cultural aspects of tonight's discussion.
If you feel so uprooted, if you feel so like displaced from like everything you thought defined you in the past, you grab at like the closest identity that you can find, and the religion is one of them. And in the way that they've been mobilized and radicalized, they're spoken to very directly about the things that they've lost and the things that they must claim back. And they internalize that, and I think that the cows have just become a prop for that like theater of control.
ये सूचना मिली थी हमें, ये हमको सूचना मिली थी कि रात को जो है कसाई गाय उठाते हैं तो रात को हम जो अपनी पूरी टीम के साथ नाके पे चले गए। ये यहाँ ईद से भी लगभग ये है 8-10 दिन पहले बात।
हमारा जो उद्देश्य होता है ये होता है कि हम गाड़ी को ट्रेसिंग करते हैं, गाड़ी का नंबर देखते हैं, उसके बाद फिर हम ये मौका देखते हैं कि गाड़ी कहीं ट्रैफिक में कहीं मतलब ब्रेकर पे या कहीं लाल बत्ती पर रुकेगी तब हम गाड़ी बाहर डालते हैं, क्योंकि इनके पास अगर हथियार वगैरह हो। गाय उठाने वालों के पकड़े जाने के बाद उग्र जनता भले मारपीट करने पर उतारू हो जाती है।
I don't exactly know where it began, but now like every small village, town, city has their own chapter of their own like outlet for protection of cows, and the ways in which they do that are more and more violent. We're talking about midnight raids, we're talking about murder, we're talking about like lynchings, and like all of this is shot on video, shared on social media.
गाय के तस्कर सिर्फ एक ही समुदाय है इस देश के अंदर, मुसलमान हैं। मुसलमान ही गौ तस्करी करते हैं। जिनको हम समय समय पे जो है बिल्कुल उनके चैलेंज को हम स्वीकार करके उनको चुनौतीपूर्वक हम अपनी चेतावनी दिए हुए हैं कि जब भी जिस तरीके से भी पकड़े जाएंगे तो जो बिहेव गौ माता के साथ होता है उनके साथ होना स्वाभाविक है।
I'd like to invite on stage Rohi Jump, Yuri Boom and Wart Berenschot, please. Gentlemen, welcome. Rohit, if I can start with you just for a quick introduction question. What's your background? Happy to have you here.
Yeah, so I'm Rohit Sham and I'm a common man in India. I belong to an upper caste Hindu sect. That means nobody cares for us, to be honest. Everybody wants to appease minorities in certain sects, but we are the ones, I think, where we have really struggled and shined through merit only and no help in terms of benefits the government gives. I came to
where did you grow up?
So I am from Delhi, born and brought up in Delhi, and I did my undergraduation from Delhi University, and then did my masters from the southwest of India in Maharashtra. Worked in Bangalore, worked back in Delhi. So I've seen quite a lot of India through my first 25 years, and then I'm in Netherlands. I was sent here to work here.
Okay.
I was sent here. That way.
You gave us some children as well?
Yes, I have not given it to you yet.
Okay.
I think I'll give myself and my daughter both this year to Netherlands, and I think this is one society that I really want my daughter to grow up in.
Thanks for your introduction. Wart Berenschot in the middle. Welcome. Researcher, can you tell us a bit about the topics you research?
Yes, thank you for having me. My background is political science, and I did my PhD on Hindu-Muslim violence, particularly the pogrom that happened in 2002 in Gujarat, where I studied the mobilization and the politics behind that violence. And now I work at the Research Institute following politics in India and politics in Indonesia.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. Yuri Boom, finally.
Hi.
Good to have you here. Journalist, and you worked and lived in Delhi, right, for quite some time?
Yeah, I worked for NOS and NRC for about 5.5 years, almost 6 years. Traveled around the region, also outside of India, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Bangladesh a lot, but mainly in India. So I have not succeeded in traveling all the states of India.
Yeah.
But I have been to quite some areas. Yeah.
Okay. And as a first reflection on the film, what did you recognize most of the things you saw, or specific topics you felt were left out?
No, not that. But what I did see was the economic situation. Things are getting better, especially from the stories I heard from the times before I arrived in 2012. But it's trickling down. For most of the groups, it's not going really fast. So people at the bottom of society are not getting rich really, really fast. So that's something I recognize.
Yeah.
The other thing is about, of course, the cow vigilantes. This guy here that we see here, who has been interviewed. I interviewed a guy like that as well.
Yeah, Pawan Pandit, right?
Yeah. So they are around.
Is he well known?
No, he's not well known. As the same goes for this guy. He's not well known as well. And well, Rohit might say something on that, but I don't think there are really those cow protectors who are really well known.
No.
There was one guy from the Punjab. He was a real criminal. Yeah. And he was known, but also for his criminal stuff, because he was in YouTube movies with shotguns and knives and God knows what. So in the end, they had to arrest him. Police had to arrest him. That's why he got known.
Okay.
So yeah, I recognize some stuff, but we have to watch out that we don't blow it up too much. We can talk about that later.
Well, maybe let's do it right now, because you feel this is getting too much attention in Western media.
Yeah, well, not in this documentary,
No.
to be sure, because this is the topic of the documentary, clear. But what I felt a bit when I was in India is that we from the West, it's hard for us to grasp India in the right way. I still can't do it. It's not enough years, 6 years, 5.5 years, not enough to understand India. But what we do understand in the West, for example, is economic development, poverty. So we might we are focusing on that, of course, because we understand that, and conflict. We are afraid of that. We know about that. So hey, there we go. Suddenly there are groups. We think it's suddenly there are groups which are protecting cows and hitting people, even killing people because of Gau Mata, the cow mother. And so we start to focus on that. There were editors calling me all the time, hey, don't you have another story about the Gau vigilantes and stuff like that? Well, I wanted to write about other stuff. So that's might be a
Rohit,
point of attention.
you agree?
Yeah, I agree. I think this topic gets more and more attention, and more than its due, I feel. When I saw the documentary, I really related to every topic mentioned in the documentary, and I almost agreed, yes, it is happening. But then I looked back and I thought, where is the context to it? Why is this happening? And why is this coming up so often by our media? You have to understand that, I think, just to start from the point that my previous speaker said, is Modi came in power in 2014 as not because of Hindu majority. If you see the stats, 31% of the population voted for Modi, and the rest was distributed, hence Modi won. And it was not all Hindus. A lot of Muslims voted for Modi because his motto was Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas, which actually translates to we'll grow together, every Indian, and not we'll grow only Hindus. So he came in with a big promise, and the Gau Rakshaks, or the cow protectors, as we call them, they used to exist long back, and they have been there in the scene, and they belong to certain parties that supported Modi, of course. But then we have to differentiate between Gau Rakshaks and cow vigilantes. I think people like this guy, Ved, some guy, and the Pawan Pandit, these don't belong to those parties which have been Gau Rakshaks. Gau Rakshaks is cow protection, and their modus operandi is actually, if they see cow smuggling, they report it to police and make sure they get caught.
Okay, so they don't harass and violate people themselves.
Not themselves, but these small fringe elements who have in hunger of PR and hunger of airtime and try to make their case and be more powerful in their locality, they have come up.
Okay, so you agree it is blown up in the media, and social media has its part, of course, in making this bigger than it should be.
And I think there's a political discourse to it, because if you've seen the last 4 years, there's not a single corruption charge against this government. So the opposition has to find something. The opposition has to bring something up which can hit Modi hard. And nice that you brought the 2002 riots, which at that time Modi was chief minister of the state, Gujarat. And he just became the chief minister 2 days before these riots took place. So he had no benefit on getting these riots. Still, he was demonized by then center government to say that he was the reason of that riot.
Okay.
He was given a clean sheet by our Supreme Court.
Yeah.
He was given a clean sheet by the Special Investigation Task Team, SIT, that he is not at all. Rather, he's the first chief minister who got everything under control within 3 days and reduced the number of deaths. And from 2002 till 2014, when he became the prime minister, There's not a single case of riot in Gujarat. So normally we start comparing Modi with the Western Trump, and he came up with nationalist. But forget that Modi has been a successful leader for his own state for 15 years. He developed Gujarat
not with a strong nationalist agenda, but
No,
with
just
an agenda of developing the Indian
Absolutely.
nation or that specific constituency.
Absolutely. If you see that, last point.
Yeah.
If you see the top spokesperson of BJP, 3 of them are Muslims,
Mhm.
and of course there's a Hindu nationalism behind it. But India has always been a Hindu nationalist country. Look at our mottos. Our government motto is Satyamev Jayate. It comes from Bhagavad Gita. Our motto for Supreme Court is Yata Dharmastato Jayaha, which means where there is justice, there is victory, comes from Bhagavad Gita. So and I can count 58 institutions like that. So we have been a very Hindu nationalist country in the sense, but yeah, we have never been Hindu traditionalist. I want to enforce that point, because Hindu traditionalism is trying to enforce your own culture on others, which we have never been. And maybe you can go to the speakers, but I want to elaborate more points on this.
We'll do that later. But Bart, hi. Well, so we talk about that cow radicalism, but also the Gujarat situation 2002 was just mentioned. Well, how do you see that cow radicalism? Is that a large part of a larger Hindu nationalist agenda, or not at all?
Yes, and you might say that particular phenomena is overblown, but at the same time it is the latest phase of a longer standing strategy of demonizing Muslims. And I think it's important to put that a bit into perspective and why that's happening. And I do feel that that is a deliberate element of the electoral and political success of BJP and the Hindu nationalist movement, even if Modi's own image, he has tried to steer away from it. But the broader thing, it has played a big role. And there I think the background to the story of Pankaj Mishra's talk about the effect of globalization and the rise of internationalism has 2 moments in the 1990s. One is the liberalization of the economy, which was mentioned in 91. And the other big moment is 1990, when the then government announced, had a commission called the Mandal Commission, who said they would have more reservation for lower caste people, which created the sentiment which actually Rohit just very nicely formulated, like, I'm from another caste and my jobs and chances are being taken away. Well, I on merit would have gotten it, and now people get it on the basis of their caste. Created a feeling at that time that Congress, the ruling party at that time, was winning elections by leaning on a combination of Muslim votes and lower caste votes. And this is where the electoral strategy of Muslims came in, because Muslims were an instrument for the BJP to unite the Hindu vote and to break that coalition that Congress was relying on of lower caste and Muslim votes. So they used partly that sentiment of, hey, this is unfair, these reservations, in combination with, I would say, demonizing Muslims and saying they are the enemy and we Hindu nationalists are the protectors against.
So that's really a strategy, that demonization?
I would say that's a deliberate and conscious political strategy. It has been for the last 30 years. And the cow protection movement is just the latest way that you can do it, because you have to be inventive a bit, but it's just a new phase of it.
Does the other panelists agree?
I think you're right, because you could see it happening. Well, this is a couple of years ago. I was still in India, so it's like 1.5, 2 years ago with the Yogi Adityanath, who in Uttar Pradesh, the most populous state of India, very important state for the coming elections, because it's a district voting system. He was put in place as a chief minister by the Modi government, and he's a very staunch Hindutva guy. Hindu Rashtra, India is the country for Hindus, and all other religions which are friendly to Hinduism are okay, but we do have a problem with Islam. That's Yogi Adityanath. And even, I checked it, I read everywhere, there was like a clip of him on YouTube, so let me check it out. And there's this clip, it's years ago, and he's speaking towards an audience, huge audience, probably all Hindus, and he's saying, like, for every Hindu, they kill. We will, and then he says 100. He stops, and all the people shout, "Kill Muslims."
Okay.
We will kill 100, but he doesn't use the word kill, so they can't arrest him. So this is the guy now running the most populous state in India, which will play a huge role in the coming elections, because like who's gonna have those seats there? And word is that already, the BJP is trying to set up groups against each other, and Yogi Adityanath might play a huge role in that. So this is part of what Ward says. This is this development that Hindus and Muslims are being set up against each other for political gain.
Okay.
And the cow protection movement, if you may say, those vigilantes, those type of guys that we saw here, that's relatively new also, because there's also a crime involved there.
Yeah.
They are surfing on this wave of Hindus against Muslims, but like guys like this has been in the news. They threaten people who move cows around, and they give them a solution as well. It's like, if you pay up, then we don't burn your van down in which you transport the cows.
Okay.
If you pay up beforehand, we won't even trace you and stuff like that. And that has been a lot in the news. So it's also a crime thing on the waves of Hindu.
Do you feel that sort of deliberate strategy, as you agree, is paying off and will pay off in the coming elections? Do you feel that this will grow?
Question to me? Well, for at least until last year, I felt so, because Modi and BJP had been leading in the polls with big margins, and Congress is not doing that well, or at least until recently, and particularly since I felt that the kind of chauvinistic Hindu nationalism was being accepted by a large part of the population, or at least not attacked as much. And here I would like to agree with you that Modi in 2014 was not elected out of Hindu nationalism, but more out of a disagreement, for example, with the kind of corruption of Congress and other things, which played a role. But if you look at how little anger about the cow movement, or the attacks on people that have a different view that has been happening over the last 5 years, very easily people were branded as anti-patriotic and non-national for having a different view. That I do felt that kind of brand of Hindu nationalism is widespread also and supported. But now the other part of the story, it is true that opinion polls have been shifting over the last year, and recently
towards Congress.
Towards Congress, and Congress won 3 major elections in 3 states just 2 months ago, and all of a sudden you think this election might be in play again.
Okay, Rohit.
I just want to add here. I think your point is very fair. Just one context that everybody should know. I don't know how many of you know this, but more than 25% of Hindu eat beef in India.
More than 25%.
More than 25% of Hindus eat beef in India, which is 250 million people out there. So I don't think anybody appeases Hindus when they do this kind of cow vigilantism.
But they don't dare to order beef openly, right? You can't do that.
No, and that's why that's a very good point, and I want to highlight this one. It's not that there's a law in India for the last 30 years that apart from 3 states, which is Kerala, Mizoram, and Assam, cow slaughter is banned. You cannot slaughter cow because it's sacred, as you said, it's holy. So if you want to eat, it is in Kerala, Mizoram, Assam. You can get it from there. But when the smuggling starts, that's when the cow rakshaks, and again say, let's differentiate between cow protectors and cow vigilantes, because cow protectors' modus operandi is inform the authority and get them arrested. So it's not that after Modi this law has come into picture. It was always there. People were flaunting it without any repercussions before this, but now it has stopped. So first of all, eating beef is not a taboo. 20 to 50 million people eat beef. And when you say that Modi has lost his shine, I totally agree, because, and that's where we should question him. See, the politicians come with a lot of promise on development. And this kind of news is actually help to them that shifts our focus away from the key issues. Like I want to target Modi on demonetization, where he just overnight stopped the currency, in which was I think very unplanned and not a successful move. But what these kind of news does is people start discussing cows, and polarization only benefits both BJP and Congress. Just to your point, when I said that, yeah, there's a enduring apprehension about this reservation. It was not about reservation, it's about appeasement. Like I have grown up in India knowing that there are certain benefits given to people of certain religion without knowing their economical background. I'll give you some examples and you will realize what I'm saying. Like in the UPA, which is the Congress government, in their time there was a law passed that if there is a communal right in India, the onus is on the majority, irrespective of who was the instigator. It's a law passed in UPA government, which was revised by the BJP government. If you open an institute which is religious in nature, like Jamia Islamia, Aligarh Muslim University, you don't need to follow the constitution to its full. You can give seats to anybody you want. Now, these kind of appeasements were done by the previous governments, and which led to corruption, which led to people flaunting rules and anger. And I think that anger was brewing already for a long time. Not maybe say not an anger, but a disappointment. That why after 70 years or 65 years of my independence, I'm still discussing Muslim Hindu. And when Modi came in, he came up with a promise of development and not saying about any caste, any religion. Everybody thought, yeah, this is the guy who will change. And I don't know if you know that Modi's full name is Narendra Damodar Modi, which comes from a very low caste in Hindu society. So that itself shows how the society has risen and accepting low caste people, which is much more happening now.
Are there any reflections from the audience? Maybe, yes.
Yeah, I had a question already before, and I like that you actually mentioned the more economic part of it, because we've been discussing a lot of the Hindu nationalist part, and I thought actually Modi, the impression that I got is at least trying or at least doing things to develop the country, but on the heads of like the minorities and the Muslims maybe. But I would like to get your vision on that. Do you think, is he doing any good for the country in terms of development, and is that trickling down? Or not at all?
Maybe I'll give you some examples of his good things. He's done many not so good things as well. And I'm very big Modi critique. Let me make it very clear. My father is a big supporter, and we both are always debating, and we get to a very nice consensus later.
Okay.
So somehow.
But what are the good things he has done?
Yeah. So let me start with the check on inflation. Till 2014, the inflation rate of India was about 6.2% on an average. In Modi's regime, in the first year, the inflation actually went to negative, and now it is about 3%. So he has checked inflation. India's ranking on ease of business doing in India has gone from 132 to 100. So we have just bypassed 30 countries in that ranking. Infrastructure, the amount of roads Modi has developed in India is equivalent to the amount of roads developed by UPA in 30 years. Just by, because I'm an insights person, I believe in data. Yeah. I'll not go by perceptions. So I challenge Modi on these. I'm fair enough to appreciate him for these good things. But yes, at the same time, there were certain policies he came up with which was supposedly good for the economy but backfired. Like demonetization was one of them, GST is another. But then, on the other hand, like Sharbari talked about the toilets, the Swachh Bharat Abhiyan, the Beti Bachao, Beti Padhao Abhiyan, which is all about women empowerment, which is all about making sure women have enough resources available to them. The ratio of women to men have really increased. It was much lower before Modi, but with Beti Padhao, the female feticide has reduced so much. And the reason why Modi lost, and that's my last point maybe, and then I'll give it. Modi lost in the Hindu-dominated regions, Rajasthan, Madhya Pradesh. Why?
When did he lose there?
He lost the state elections.
Okay.
3 elections he lost in the
recent ones,
last 6 months.
Okay, yeah.
And you have to understand, why will he lose? Because we always talk about cow vigilantes. He was the only person, and if you see the stats again, I come by stats. Number of reports, number of arrests of these cow vigilantes is the highest in Modi government's tenure. They have made sure that, and this is one of his, a quote from 2016, where he said, these cow vigilantes are nothing but goons who have opened up their shops.
Okay, so because he's firm on these cow vigilantes, he is losing
He lost
elections.
that vote bank,
Okay.
but he didn't care about
Thanks.
it.
We go to Ward.
yeah, I don't know if that's a reason, but if I can come back to the metaphor of boats, I think the kind of globalization that we see in India has risen, has raised a few boats and significantly and important, but at the same time, it not just has failed to lift up other boats, but actually punctured a lot of boats, in the sense that the securities conditions in which they have to live have become more difficult.
And it goes for specific cultural minorities or
no
lower class in general?
Yes. One example is from the city I used to live, Ahmedabad, which was the early motor of industrialization in India because it had the textile industry. Big mills where early industrialists put up big lawns to, so they produced textile for the rest of the world. And they had labor unions and workers that were rather well protected. And globalization for them meant that the labor unions were first oppressed or less effective, and then the mills were gradually closed down, and the kind of living conditions that this working class had deteriorated. And I think the current administration, Modi, has in some sense continued that focus on the middle class and the industrialists and supporting them, while not doing enough to really prevent the puncturing or fix the holes in the boat. And you can see that particularly, now I come to these states, in rural India, where there's always discussion about farmer suicides, and because the living conditions there are quite appalling and the economic development there is
and that's really a topic, farmers killing themselves because of their bad economic situations.
Yeah, and I think it's the rural population in these states that turned against Modi because they felt that the Modi government has an urban bias and is seen as pro-industrialist, and that's harming them.
Thanks.
Can I hold it or? Okay. I think I'm Indian. I live here 25 years. I'm still Indian. I don't want to be Dutch on purpose. Anyways, so Modi, I come from Ahmedabad. Modi's government, when he was a chief minister, Gujarat had a yearly growth of around 18 to 22, 24% for 14 years. One of the reasons he was elected, obviously, is because all Indians, if I may say so, are first very economic-minded people. On second, they are religious. And in India, since we became independent, the politicians are mostly from uneducated, lower conditions. And people who make money, businesses, they are educated people. And Indian politics is very difficult to penetrate if you are educated. So you see that globalization has helped people to move on beyond politics and become more middle-class people. And people who want to quickly earn money, they have to go into political business. And that's why there is a very huge rise in all these other things where the people who are uneducated can easily get into politics and become rich by corruption. So actually the India's really, at the moment, major problem is that how would the economically well-doing people, therefore also globally educated people, how can they influence Indian politics? That's a very big issue that we are facing. We are not facing actually a religious problem there. And I would ask actually all the people up there to react on climate change in India a little bit.
It's another topic, yeah, after that long and valuable introduction.
It is an important one, but for now, it is very important.
Sorry? I missed it, sorry.
No, I just reacted on this climate change thing. But what you said about education reminds me of another point of the lady before who asked a question. One of the things that Modi is I think, doing wrong, and many governments did wrong in that respect, is he's not focusing at all on education.
Mm-hmm.
And the Indian education, the lower education, is appalling. Really, it's very much below the standards of India itself. There's like generations being ruined by having very bad lower education. So I was amazed that Modi was not focusing on that, because he's always speaking about the younger generation building India anew, being an influential country in the world. He's speaking about, which is good, make in India, to get those companies out of China and bring them into India, which would create a lot of jobs. And this is, as we saw, one of the huge topics. But he's neglecting education once again. A government is neglecting education. It's a big problem.
Okay. I'd like to go to you. The climate change, maybe later on we really focus on the cultural and the finance, not specifically only, but first like to make sure we tackle all the subjects related to that. Hello.
Hello. Well, it's not really maybe a question, but I lived in India for a while in Tamil Nadu, and in the rural area, and people don't have toilets there in their house because they have to spend their money on something else. Toilets are built in communities once there's money available. At the time when I lived there, Jayalalitha was chief minister of Tamil Nadu, and she tried to buy votes probably by handing out televisions to everybody. A lot of people didn't have electricity, so they started selling televisions and get more money for it and buy something else with it. So I have a certain view on politics and how that goes. But what intrigues me is if the central government has any projects or plans to do something about the gap between rural India and urban India, because urbanization passed 50% as well a couple of years ago, and that has tremendous effects. And when I go back to Tamil Nadu regularly, and the climate there, I'm not talking about climate change yet, but the climate is so difficult. So farmers, they had drought for 3 years, no drinking water available in the lake where there is resorts as well, no swimming possible. But the drinking water, of course, is a problem. And, well, in my surroundings as well, farmers committed suicide because they couldn't cope with it anymore. Loan sharks, buying for the wedding of their daughters. So, and these people, I think Delhi and everything else is so far away, they couldn't care less. They do care about corruption, but they couldn't care less about national government.
Should be so there should be more focus on the rural areas, is what you're saying. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Rohit?
Sure. Definitely. I'll highlight two. I totally agree that rural area was neglected for a long time, and the problem of farmers is not new. There are so many middlemen that the thing that they sell for 5 paisa comes to us as 50 rupees, which is 100 times more. So they earn nothing as compared to what we pay for that. There are so many middlemen. Now what Modi did, and again, I appreciate him for his good things, in this case specifically, every farmer, or most of the farmers were incorporated into the Jan Dhan Yojana. Now what is Jan Dhan Yojana? Which is a scheme to get every farmer a bank account, which was never the case before. And the middlemen used to deal in cash and they were never getting the real money. Now all this, what that did, it made sure that the middlemen had to pay everything in white and they cannot take away anything from the farmer. I think Shabari will also confirm that yesterday or day before yesterday, Modi announced that 5 lakh villages in India are now open defecation free. It's now, toilets are built in these villages which never had toilets.
But he pays to get those certificates. They're absolutely false.
Yeah. For me, see, that's why I'm saying I go by stats, and I don't want to go in the perception of perception of people who mention that, because ultimately it's the NSSO that decides how many development has happened. NSSO is the National Statistics Survey Organization, which does these surveys, and that's how he declares his accomplishments. And having said that, of course, I'm saying even if 50% of the news is correct, it's still a way better performance on that front versus any other previous government.
Still, if we would like to give some political advice to him, it would be sort of focus more on education and focus more on rural areas.
And that's one point I totally agree, and we should just corner Modi on that. And I'm being very honest on that because I believe in education. The reason me and my fellow people could do well was education, and that and not giving education to many people is also a big, if I can say, a phenomena, a scam, where there's a lot of public institutions which are brought up and the government education is kept deliberately at a low level. So what happens is that these private institutions gain a lot of money and they commercialize education versus the government education, which is not good at all. So I totally agree that is one area Modi needs to answer.
Okay.
He needs to work on that and ensure that everybody gets it.
Cheers.
If I can take up your question, the main initiative of Indian government to support rural areas has been the National Rural Employment Guarantee Act, the NREGA, which was adopted, I think, 2005 under the previous Congress government, with a guarantee of 100 days of paid work to a rural population. And the idea was that, we need to stop the move from the villages to the cities, so we need to guarantee some income, some employment. And it was relatively successful, and one sign of it was that it raised the general daily wages that people got in those areas, so it increased their bargaining position versus others employers. But that was the same reason why I think, in my view, the current government wasn't particularly liking it, because for business there's a downside, and social spending was not that much liked. So what the Modi government did was not abolish the plan, which would politically be not smart thing to do, but instead defund it. So the funding of the program went down to such levels that I think they haven't been getting even 15 days of work in the villages. So that basically the program isn't working right now. And I think, coming to stats, one of the key things of how India is run is the very low amount of what you call social spending. So people count how much governments spend on welfare provisions like the Rural Employment Guarantee Act or educational support or any kind of support. In the Netherlands, last I looked, this is at 22% of GDP. And in India, this is only at 7.5, so it's 3 times less than it is in the Netherlands, while the need is arguably bigger. So there is a lot of not putting your money where your mouth is in India.
Yeah. We're reaching the conclusion of tonight. You're still making a voice for climate change? Okay, you want to react? Yeah, please. Yeah, please do.
So in middle of India somewhere, there is a region which had lots of droughts, and one farmer built a lake on his own land, which is normally doesn't happen, and he was successful to collect water. And right now, within last 3 years, they built 400,000 lakes, and the government subsidizes now every single lake. So there are the dynamics that we don't see in media. I mean, there is a lot going on, let's say.
Bit of a risk, but if we want to tackle that climate change issue you just raised with the panel, what would in one sentence be the question you would like to ask them? Because you raised a topic and now it's sort of hanging in the air a bit.
I was guessing that he'll come up with some statistics about about what India is doing for solar energy. So they have a budget of 7 gigatons of solar till 2020. So there is a lot of economically driven thinking, which if it really happens, I guess that the trickle down will ultimately should happen. I mean, and meanwhile we have to protect the political system and the democracy.
Can I add a small thing about the climate change? That's from a media perspective. I've been for years I've been asking NOS later, but first NRC, give me some room, more room, space in newspaper to write about climate change and how India is suffering from that, because India is really suffering from it. Drought has been mentioned. Then we have the water levels rising, so communities at seaside, down south, and in the Andaman Islands and stuff like that, they really suffer. And of course, we all know that the glaciers are melting down. So in the Himalaya, there's lots of flooding and stuff like that. But it was always like, climate change, we have another perspective on that. We focus on other areas, on Antarctica and stuff like that. Now, India maybe in half a year's time. So there was, for a long time, there was not much focus, not much awareness at my editing boards, at NOS and NRC, for the gravity of this problem. I think it's changing a bit, and I hope my successors are being pushy as I was, so that there will be more attention to this.
Because it's really an urgent issue.
It's very urgent. It's very urgent. Yeah.
Okay. Word?
It's also very political, which is the for me as a social scientist, the interesting thing about it, but also a little bit tragic. Gujarat, where I lived, seeing a really drastic lowering of groundwater levels. There was up to 10, 20 centimeters per year. So I could see these bore wells where farmers would just go, 20, 30, 40 meters down to get water. And then there was an initiative, the Narmada Dam, that blocked a river and that built big canals to irrigate areas of Gujarat, so which potentially could address the problem. But there you get politics. That water was largely diverted to the city of Ahmedabad because they wanted to have the Sabarmati River filled again. It's the river that runs through the city, because it looks so nice for these voters that, look, we got the river back and the water is going, at the expense of the farmers in rural Gujarat who weren't getting their water.
Okay.
So water is really a political issue in India right now.
Okay. Let's leave it at that. I'm sure there's a lot of more things to say about India in general, but specifically on climate change in India as well. But thanks a lot for now, Yuri, Boom, Wart, Berenschot, and Rohit Jan. Thanks a lot. Thank you. Thanks a lot to all our guests tonight. Thanks a lot for coming tonight. I have a few practical remarks I would like to make. As you know, all our programs are free to visit, but if you like them to remain that way, it could be an option to use our pay-as-you-like system. There's a short slide about it at the end of the evening. Next week there will be a new Tegenlicht broadcast, the Chinese dollar, the Chinese dollar. What if the Chinese renminbi replaced the dollar as a global exchange currency? That program will be in Dutch, to be sure. Sunday evening on national television, and Wednesday evening the Backlight Meet Up here again in Pakhuis Zwijger. Hope to see you then. Thanks a lot. Bye bye.
Thank you very much.
Going to look at a short promo. Sorry to miss that announcement.
19e eeuw pond sterling, 20e eeuw Amerikaanse dollar, 21e eeuw Chinese renminbi.
Is China klaar om haar munt tot wereldreservemunt te promoveren?
The renminbi might well become an international reserve currency in the future, but only if the rules of the game change.
Het punt is wel dat de rest van de wereld de dollarpolitiek een beetje zat begint te worden.
Het spel om de knikkers. Zondag in VPRO Tegenlicht.